Hello again, everyone, everywhere. Now here we are together with John Perretti. Second discussion we're having with John, who is a very well-read friend and participant. I loved and really appreciated our first conversation because you really stepped in and challenged me on points that helped me refine what I'm thinking and looking at and do my best to be more accurate in the statements I make, in the comments I make, and also recognize that words ultimately are never going to describe something if we all know it, that is absolute and inherent in our existence. Then the words are never going to quite get there, but they can certainly point in that direction and certainly aim in that direction and certainly allow others who are listening, if they're listening, to begin to recognize their own awareness is well beyond what they think. And I would suggest that if you notice that you observe your thoughts, and if you don't think you observe your thoughts, just start noticing that when you're thinking about your thoughts, you're observing your thoughts. And the observer of those thoughts is obviously not the thoughts. For us to see them means that's not who we are, nor can we be, though we can think we are only what we think. That's certainly a possibility of thought. When thoughts think of themselves, they think of a self born of thought. So that's thought thinking of thought. That isn't thought thinking of me. That isn't thought. That's me using thought to think of it as though it's something independent from me rather than something I'm choosing and deciding and concluding and having, producing. So if I get mixed up in my thoughts, I can live in a world that feels very mixed up and make believe that somehow it's everything else out in the world rather than what I'm actually doing. And our focus is to start looking at what we're actually doing. And I said to John earlier that I was getting the announcement ready for Sunday's discussion. And one of the things that occurred to me, and has sort of been talked about before, is the idea that most people struggle with compulsions or impulsiveness or reactiveness and want to know how to stop it. And most people who come to me needing help, wanting direction, are sober generally, not always, but struggling with mentally obsessive thoughts, chronically disturbing thoughts that are just seemingly happening to them. And so stopping something avoids why we're starting it. And if the basis of our problem isn't being looked at as what we're doing to cause it, the chances are looking at the effect of it, the symptom of it, the feeling of it per se, is not going to get better by trying to feel better about the thing we're doing that still remains worse. And I would say that's a central issue with addiction. And as I told John earlier today, as I was writing, I thought, I want to boil it down, make it simpler, make it seem like something you can carry with you in a thought during the day and just look at and start to actually contemplate and see how it fits and what it does to your experience. And one of the things that occurred to me is that if this idea that we've been trying to treat the effect, and alcohol is a great way, drugs is a great way, any kind of compulsion is trying to escape the effect by trying to feel better about what doesn't feel good, what feels uncomfortable, what feels doubtful, what feels uncertain, what's shaky, what's anxious, what's fearful. Because obviously we have a relationship to it based in not wanting it to be what it is and simply accepting whatever's going on is going on. So the central theme may well be that if I think I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, I'm effectively believing that it's possible not to be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing. And that would be a major conflict. If I'm both thinking I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing, I have created an interminable, impossible inner conflict that both claims to be doing what I'm doing and not doing what I'm doing simultaneously. I can't be doing both simultaneously. I can do one or the other, and I can stop what I'm doing once I start it, but to not notice what I'm starting would be almost impossible to stop. I wouldn't have any awareness of it if I was pretending it didn't exist. And so it would seem impossible, which is very often exactly what addiction seems like. So this idea that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, when in fact I'm doing what I'm doing, misses the point that if I begin to simply embrace what I'm doing, I begin to have the peace of mind and the rest it takes to rest in peace on earth rather than in earth, and start to notice that I have no obligation to continue doing that thing, starting that thing, which means I'll never have to stop it because I'll stop starting it. There's an old adage in Alcoholics Anonymous that we don't get drunk from the third or fourth or 10th drink. It's the first one. And this would go to that point. If it's the first thought and I become aware of what it is I'm doing in that first thought and have that first thought, right or wrong, good or bad, comfortable or uncomfortable, and let it be what it is, because it is what it is, my thoughts are no longer in conflict with it, and I can begin choosing from freedom, which is my nature, the ultimate nature, rather than desperation. And choosing from freedom gives me a much more considered view. Considerate meaning contemplative, aware, engaged in a way that is not seemingly happening to me, because I'm recognizing that what I am about to do is going to cause another effect. And whether I want that effect that I'm claiming not to want is going to result as a result of the decisions I make. Desperation tends to lead to desperation. Peace tends to lead to peace. So the peaceful nature of our existence, when I'm not putting myself into interminable inner conflict in thought, is going to give me a chance to start making decisions that are much more restive and peaceful and probably more productive and useful. And I say probably just to leave a little room there for slight attempts that still include other thoughts that aren't quite right, but start to see that the friction that's occurring is always occurring in the present. It's always starting where I am, and it's always with what I'm doing that's giving me the greatest impression of what's happening in the world. If I start thinking I'm not doing what I'm doing and see through the lens of making believe that it's everyone else doing it, and it's the world that's difficult, and the world that's complicated, and the world that's hard and impossible, and life is impossible, when in fact it's the impossibility of my own thinking that is the lens I'm looking at that world backward through, blaming the world rather than acknowledging my own responsibility. So that's a brief intro, I expect, given my tendency to go on. And John, good morning.
Morning.
I think it's still morning in Texas, isn't it?
I don't know, 11:23.
I mean, morning starts at 3 in Texas, so
Why is that?
everybody's up on the farms. The ranches are going.
There's no farms.
You're in Houston.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's define opinion, because you talk about all these things. So I really want to like break some of these definitions down so that we're all on the same page as to what you're talking about. So this thoughts that they form things, right? They form basically opinions, right?
Yeah.
So in my estimation, a belief is what a person assumes or holds to be true. And then they form an opinion about that belief, regardless of the particular matter.
Belief is probably an opinion.
Belief is definitely a matter of opinion.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's going to lead to more of the same.
Well, I think belief is really important to understand in order to see how either unhappiness or happiness arises.
Yes. Well, I think what you're looking at more fundamentally than that, truth is probably, in reality and absolute states of nature and life, would be very fundamentally flawed to make believe that anything I come up with as a result of thinking wrongly about those basic elements of existence would ever be anything other than conflicted and basically an attempt to overcome the most fundamental thoughts I have about existence in general.
I'm really glad that you said that then. Because when you talk about natural and these things that you say are, flowing, those are beliefs.
Okay. You think nature could be unnatural?
You there?
Yeah. You still here?
Yeah. No, you glitched, and so I looked at your picture, and you're not moving.
I said, do you think nature could be unnatural? Like true could be false?
Yeah, I think that the word nature, needs to be solidified because it is a belief. You use that word a lot, and I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, understanding what you believe to be natural.
Well, let's say, though, John, that's very, very common. And basically what humans have gotten mired in is the attempt to turn words into the definitive nature of nature, for instance. And I would suggest that if nature is natural, which I would suggest it may be, because it wouldn't be nature if it weren't, then there's a simplicity to it that could be conceded as simply being the basis of existence as it is, regardless of what I think, which then eliminates belief and definition and all that other kind of stuff and starts to suggest that if existence is existence and the premise of existence is this life we have, is this life form that we're experiencing life through, or life's possibilities through, they're all basically concepts of consciousness and awareness and possibilities. They're expressions of possibilities. So my sense is that what would be natural in that is survival, which I would suggest our instincts are pretty good at helping us understand what that means. Well, while in addiction, the instincts turn completely backward and they become the threat. We become the actual enemy within our own bodies that threatens our survival by doing the things addictively. So in fundamental ways, because my sense is if we all have a basis in knowing, say in truth, for instance, whatever that means, I don't want to even begin to try to define it, but I can imagine that truth would certainly mean true and not mean false. It would certainly indicate within a realm of possibilities, it would be something that would work within the natural order, whatever that order is, whatever that nature is. And what would that mean? If I plant an oak seed, I'm probably going to get an oak tree if I water it and put it in fertile ground. If I function along the lines of nature, I'm probably going to create productive ends within nature. And my sense is the difference is what works and what doesn't work, what fails and what succeeds. And that is a guiding principle to function versus dysfunction.
Right. And you always quantify the good and the bad in everything.
I do, or it's typically
you do.
Well, I suggest that what's good is what's productive and useful because it's beneficial to everyone. And what would be bad is what fails and doesn't really exist that we make believe does exist. Like you're describing, a belief doesn't have to be based in truth to be believed in. And that's the whole problem with it, is that it can give the impression that it's true. That's the major conflict in thoughts. Living with those thoughts drive us crazy. And I would say it doesn't even drive us because we're crazy where we are. We don't need to be driven. We're just driven by the craziness and continue to perpetuate choices on the basis of the fear and the anxiety and the stress and wonder why things just keep getting worse.
Right. So fear, is central to the understanding of how unhappiness arises. And that belief that the unhappiness is alive in our bodies as an emotion, like we're feeling sad or anger or frustration or hatred, we can manifest all that stuff by believing in a negative way.
Well, and I would say the negative is literally attempting to negate that there's anything there that's real. When we talk about negative,
belief,
what's that?
however, the belief is huge. It's the precursor to everything.
It only seems like
precursor to every, huh?
It only seems like it because we become consumed with trying to maintain it because its only basis isn't thought, like a lie. If my belief aligns with a seed being planted, I never have to believe in planting that seed again. I just know that if I put it in the ground and water, it's going to grow. There's no belief left because it's like in math. When I got to 2 + 2 is 4, I realized I didn't have to go back through all the year-long lessons it took to finally help me understand that. I just started applying it. So the application of it is the confirmation of what I would say would be the difference between good and bad within the context of human endeavors.
Our emotions are the expression of our beliefs about causes of happiness and unhappiness.
Well, I would say our emotions are literally reflective of all the darkness that we project in our own psyche of a vacancy of substance in beliefs that have no basis. Just like lie is
unhappiness.
Lie is the belief it's true. It can't be true. That's the whole point of a lie. If it were true, it wouldn't be a lie. So that conflict.
I understand.
So happiness,
I
happiness would be, in my estimation, an absence of those conflicts. It would naturally be, you know how from space when they look at light, they see the spectrum, and in the spectrum there are missing lines. I forget what it's called off the top of my head, but when they're looking at a light spectrum from a star, for instance, the makeup of that star provides a light spectrum, but the actual elements within that light spectrum are missing. So it looks like a barcode. If it's helium, where helium is on the light spectrum is missing. It's black. So the interesting thing is the thing that's projecting is in fact the helium, but the one thing unseen in the light spectrum is where the helium is. And my suspicion is because we relate emotions to color, blue, red, yellow, all those things are related to fear and sadness, and green is envy, and all that kind of stuff. We've lined up in words to align with that our prism, the light radiating through us, that's always radiating through us, appears to be blocked by the issues we're creating, so that those lines seem to be invisible within that spectrum. And to the degree that they are, we experience those emotions associated with those colors. Now, that may be going out on a limb, but I don't think it's, I think when we think of rainbows as being this incredible thing, the rainbow is basically the revelation of that light always being present. And now, because it's a misty day and there's something to refract that light through, it begins to appear that rainbow is always present. It doesn't have any obstructions in it.
I don't think the visual spectrum quantifies emotion.
Well, it's interesting we use color to define emotions.
Well, because we made it up. Everything's made up.
Of course.
So,
it doesn't mean, though.
I've seen colors on human beings.
Yes. Well, auras.
But I can't define them as, I don't know if they are this thing called auras, but I can't define them as emotion.
Well, you could if you thought of emotion as something moving and something that is a reflection of what's happening. It's sort of the sum. My sense is emotion or feelings, which are largely, if you think of feelings, it's not always emotions that's being felt. You can feel bad, you can feel wrong, you can feel happy, you can feel, happy would be an emotion, I imagine. But one guy that I read said that the absence of emotion is bliss. That in the face of an absolute source, experienced as an absolute source, there is no feeling. There's just it's almost like an orgasmic sensation of complete wholeness and completion. and being intact. So bliss comes from the absence of the emotion rather than the fractured states we tend to experience in our body, which are limited to a bodily experience. They're designed to give us direction and insight. Interestingly, though, we often think of feeling as this sort of fleeting thing that should be ignored, when in fact it's giving us accurate information that our brain is actually translating. So our thinking is right. It's the immediacy of our thinking that's actually quantifying it. And when we feel bad and we feel wrong and we feel uneasy and we feel doubtful and we feel uncertain, all those things are accurate assessments of what's actually happening. And what do we think? Get over it. Try to feel better about it. Do something to not feel it. So what are we doing? Numbing ourselves to the sentient nature of our experience rather than saying exactly what I said in the opening. We're trying not to be doing what we're doing, because if that's happening and we're feeling that, we are causing it. It is coming as a result of what we're thinking. So in those ways, there's a pretty vaporous language that starts to kind of fall apart at the edges of this whole conversation, just like mathematics does as it approaches the infinite. Mathematics, when it starts to approach things infinite, unless it's using them as a function, begins to fall apart. It just doesn't, they can't seem to keep it together because they're starting to peer into the essence of something that isn't relative. So math is basically the quantifiable nature of the universe, which I would suggest is relative in terms of its form or its appearance.
In my opinion, orgasm has a source.
Yes. Well, and I would say bliss has the absolute source of nature, the absolute, infinite, unlimited, all-knowing, omniscient, omnipotent, all those words that are used. Not even transcendent, because it would suggest transcendence and metaphysics suggests it's beyond our experience. It's here and present. And I think going to the book you're reading now about out-of-body experiences and the near-death experiences that I've been listening to the book by Bruce Grayson, people witness that while they're still in their bodies. And my suspicion is, my sensation is that the actual awareness is always present. We're just busy, preoccupied with our thinking about our thinking to the degree that we make believe that's truth and reality, and it's who we are. And as a result, feel like we're desperate trying to maintain it to prove that our life is worth something, when in fact, the absolute nature of our life is exactly what we're denying, which can't be denied. But we can live like it's denied, and we can act like it's denied, and we can be stressed and anxious and upset and angry and hostile and envious and greedy and all those things that come as a result because of the scarcity of the thought we have with no substance. What greater scarcity could there be to make believe that truth is based on something that has absolutely no substance? This is now that non-existence trying to take the place of existence. Suicide is wrapped up in that thought. Addiction is wrapped up in that single thought, in the immediacy of our experience, not in someday, somewhere, somehow, but now.
Isn't suicide?
What's that?
Isn't suicide a form of survival?
Well, it's the last act of self-control, as far as I can tell. Last act, desperate act of self-control to prove that the self we think we are is in charge. It's the last egoistic move to say, look at me, I can perform here this ultimate function. And it's what overdoses are suicides, as far as if you're doing a drug that is known to kill people and simply thinking it's not going to kill you because it hasn't. Somebody told me recently, who was at the end of a 15-day drunk drug thing. He said, well, I haven't died yet. And I said, well, how many times will it take to disprove that? He thought because he's able to do this, which most people do, that I can go further and I've got it under control and you just don't see who I am. And he said, I'm a killer. And I said, yeah, exactly. Good word for it.
Right. But I think that we need to make a separation between people who are taking their life because of the amount of pain and situation that they are in physically, like terminal disease, and someone doing it for other reasons. I think that there is a survival there's a to it because of the condition that they are in. I don't
Well,
think it's all this negative thing that you formulate.
it's interesting, though, John, that as we approach death in reality, as we really get nearer, we seem to be willing to start noticing the intuitive nature of life, when in fact, when we're well, we seem to think that what that means is that we should get better at ignoring that intuitive nature because we think we got it all under control and nothing's wrong.
Mm-hmm. But let's just look back briefly and look at poor Dr. Kevorkian dying in prison.
Yeah.
Who helped, I thought he helped as a vehicle, he helped many, many people who were in just a horrible state of disrepair.
Right. But he did it knowing that the law was against him and that he many right things. The law is never right in all cases. And the law, like words, the definition of words is always changing. So is the law. But the law is generally about 50 years behind the thinking. My experience. I've been around a little bit beyond.
But he was so dedicated.
Yes.
To helping people.
So much so that he gave his life for it.
That is correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he did the exact thing that he was promoting people had the right to do. He effectively took his own life, but he it's not to say he wouldn't have died otherwise, because that the arc of this life form that he
died in prison.
I understand. I imagine he would have died in the prison of his own discontent had he not done what he did to the ends of his commitment in the way that he did. He was committed to doing that. He was committed to seeing that way. And it's very often, there are many people through history who have taken that on and said, look, if it takes my life to make this point, I will give that because I'm giving it anyhow. Why live Copernicus backed off when the church threatened to burn him at the stake if he didn't take back the fact that the earth was not at the center of the universe. Right. But, it makes some lot, what he knew was that it's going to happen in time. I don't need to be the one that presses it. I don't need to be. I have a friend here in Venice who sold raw food for years, had his own thing. And he got so committed to it that he really challenged the people, and they came in with Uzis or, AK-47, whatever they do in a SWAT thing, and arrested him and put him in jail for 9 months for selling raw food. You would think that a country built on agriculture and farming would recognize the value of food, but his choice was that he wanted to make his point, and he did it, but he suffered as a result of it. It was probably not necessary, and there were probably other ways out, but he chose that. And I respect people who are willing to stand up to that degree, especially if it's something that's beneficial to humans that are being robbed of their chance very often by laws and legislation that prohibit actually providing raw food by people. And the laws have gone in that direction, basically supporting the big food companies and all that kind of stuff. And most of the food isn't always that good. That the interesting thing is the food that's being promoted, because it can last on a shelf for 20 years, seems to be better than fresh food that can rot. Of course, food can rot because it's fresh. It's not filled with preservatives and chemicals and other things that would prohibit that. So that is a position, a thought that I have. I don't know that it's right, but it seems that nature is nature, and it's always grown food. Even before humans started, the seeds fell from the trees and they continued to grow new. The trees died, they broke down and disappeared into the fertilizer of the next generation of trees, and so on and so forth. It all seemed to be working pretty well before we started utilizing it. So people have taken on those crusades. My suspicion is it's probably worthy of committing one's life because we're already committed. We're going to die. That's a guaranteed. What is the difference if it's a little bit sooner or later when it comes to a timeless element? I'm not suggesting I'm attempting to rush that, because my suspicion is we're rushing it by the stress and agony that we're creating and anguish. We're already doing it. We're already minimizing not only the term of life, but the quality of life. And if we're doing it simply because we don't look at what we're doing accurately and honestly as a collective. We're going to do things that complement that sort of short-term thinking. And I would say if I remember right, the longevity in life in our country has diminished a little bit recently. And
Well, I live in Houston. It's the center of obesity in the United States of America.
Yeah, well, I suspect obesity is starvation, because when you give a body, this is exactly aligned with the thinking. If I give my thinking thoughts with no substance, my thinking asks for more thoughts because it's designed to express substantive thoughts. If I give my body food with no substance, no nutrition, my body's going to say, thank you, now feed me. I need nutrition. I don't need taste. I don't need fillers. I don't need things that don't serve the interest of the body. What I need is vitamin A, vitamin B, but all the basic minerals and vitamins is what the body's looking for, because it's naturally healthy. It's built out of nature.
People don't know what their body's doing. When you walk past someone who is grossly overweight, which is 4 out of 6 here, or obese, they will basically knock over shelves and bang into you. And so they inhabit their bodies. They don't have any kind of idea of what you're talking about.
I would suggest they do. I would suggest that there's a level of stress going on, a level of doubt going on, a level of embarrassment going on, all of those things that become suppressed that end up creating the continuation of the activities that are causing the problem. Now, there are probably some people prone to just putting on weight in ways that are hard to control. But my suspicion is it takes a lot of effort to maintain, just like a farmer with cattle. You've got to keep feeding the cattle to be able to continue to maintain the weight. You don't want to, I mean, a lot of cattle are fed food that aren't good for the cattle. So the meat ends up being more meat in terms of weight, but it isn't healthier than cattle that eat grass and what they're designed to eat. Cows
used to take 3 years to go to market. They now go to market in 7 months.
Yeah, and it's all corn.
Of course. So I mean, if
corn
if you go to the supermarket, right? There's 13 aisles of refined carbohydrate. In the back, there's some protein. On the right side, there's some dairy and some vegetables, right? But refined carbohydrate is what we're marketing.
Yes.
And that's why people are walking around and they can't even get out of their vehicles, including police officers.
So if that's a condition, it would also be a reflection of the same sort of scarce thinking that is trying grandiosely to prove it's right. Inflammation in the body is a consequence of the constriction of stress. So I have a difficult time digesting and ingesting carbs. My body does not deal with them well. Typically, alcoholics have an inability to metabolize sugar. Refined carbs are refined in the direction of the sugar content, not in the direction of the nutrient content. So anything refined and processed like that, fortified by vitamins, means they strip the vitamins out and are adding them back in chemically. So I listened to something NPR said, and I think they said that 70% of the food in a grocery store doesn't even qualify under the definition of food.
Of course not.
So think of that in terms of thought. If the thought is depreciated to the degree that we rely on thoughts with no substance, what are we going to think we need? More thinking. What are we going to think that includes? People agreeing with us, committing to other people, demanding other people do what we think we want, only getting expectations met that we think we need for the survival of this idea that all we are is what we think, because there's no basis other than our own projection and our own constant maintenance, just like a lie. A lie does not exist outside of a thought. And to think of it chronically is to give some evidence to the fact that the lie's only existence is us constantly thinking of it as true. So what are we doing? Creating an opposite? We're creating a thought that isn't true, creating a thought that it is true. That is a choice we make to create an internal conflict that is so deficient that the only thing we can think of as a result is to get more and more and more of things. Be somewhere else, with someone else, with something else, or less of something that we have. Constantly trying to get somewhere while we're constantly denying we're already exactly where we are with everything else. Everything is happening right now. So the deficiencies and the consequences are obvious, and they're social. These are social ills that we're facing in the exact same macro form of our microcosmic thinking that we're doing in our own cosmology, our own little universe, we think of it as. These thoughts orbiting and rotating and circulating and never stopping. They're always on the move, like our universe. And wonder why we can't stop them while we keep maintaining them by thinking they're the only thing we can do. That's addiction in a nutshell. So these byproducts socially are natural. They're natural in their unnatural state. They're healthy in the unhealthy state because they are actual witnesses to what's wrong. They're screaming for our attention. And what do? More and more and more to feel better about what's wrong. Take more drugs, deal with all the anxious things. What do? We get drug addicts get drugs for their mental case. It's not looking at the cause. It's not asking what is it we're doing to cause these things. If these are automatic and there's nothing we can do about it, then perhaps some human intervention would be worthwhile. But if these things are being caused by what we're doing, and many of the chemical imbalances in our own systems are being caused by the instability of our own thinking, then that is something we're not only causing, it is the effect that we're trying to avoid as a result of that we're continuing to maintain it. It's exactly what addiction is.
Most of my life, I've always said more is better.
Yes, me too. But now think of that, John. Let's talk about that from an absolute state. What that would tell me in the ultimate sense, if I'm looking at it accurately, is starting to see that any limited thought I have, any limited belief I maintain, any cultural norm that I think is normal will always be limited compared to an infinite source. So in that regard, there is always more because the infinite can't be measured. It doesn't have a beginning or end. It's always going to be greater because it's so great that these things I believe are true and real don't have any basis for existence except in my own thinking. They don't exist out there in the world. They exist in my thinking, and we have been so collectively mentally ill, I would say, that we have created whole societies based on that to give us the impression that this is the only thing we can do because it's normal. It isn't normal to be abnormal, to your point about nature.
Back to belief.
What's that?
Back to belief.
Yeah. Well, or relief. To see things accurately begins to see that we don't need to have any belief whatsoever in an absolute source because it is what it is, regardless of what we think.
That's a belief.
Well, it would be hard to imagine that something infinite could be questionable, in my estimation. If you start to think of something that is infinite, well, it would only be questionable if it weren't infinite. And then it's only
How do you know it's infinite?
I don't. But I'm suggesting if it is infinite, it's infinite.
Well, I'm suggesting it's not infinite. So it's not infinite. So,
okay. So you're suggesting,
I'm just being contradictory.
I understand. But this is a very fundamental argument. Because I held this for years. Everything's finite. Everything's limited. Well, if everything's limited and everything's finite, what would it be limited by? And what would it be finite in relation to? How would it be limited? Where are the ends going in this expanding universe? Where is it that seems to always have new space available for an expansion in the universe? And then I started to realize, well, if it's always moving outward, that's why they consider maybe it's infinite, but it's never quite infinite if it's always growing. It must be limited. And all it is appearance, how things look, not how they are. If the substance of infinite is infinite, it isn't beyond the finite, it's within it too. And that was a transition in terms of my awareness, is starting to see that Something that's infinite must be everywhere with everyone at all times and everything, including the railing and stairs behind you and the molecules that make up all that stuff that seems to obey without hesitation and last as long as they possibly can to give us the usefulness of those in buildings and such. They don't seem to argue with us. They just in time sort of fade. Their usefulness fades, but the molecules don't disappear. The essence of those things that are temporal don't disappear. Only the formation, just like our bodies, our life forms transition. And they're transitioning right now anyhow. What is now is no longer now. It's all changed. If it's always dying, I'm in the face of death all the time, pretending that my form proves otherwise. Not so. To begin to embrace that begins to help me see, oh, this dynamic, I am facing death all the time because the change of something that is not happening any longer is the expiration of that thing that was happening. It's over. It's done. But what is it? Culmination of everything I'm witnessing right now. So my sense is these out-of-body experiences and these near-death experiences don't need us to literally face death or experience death to experience the fullness of our absolute state of awareness. It is only a preoccupation with the life we call our own that we think is distinct from others, rather than see that life is a unifying force that provides all life for all things, all projected images, all life forms per se, and start to realize if that's our absolute state, we've just been a hallucination, a trance of preoccupation with thinking being our only source, which would be wrong if there's in fact a greater knowing awareness, an omnipotent, omnipresent. It's interesting that we contest whether it's possible, and yet humans through history have always considered it, which is pretty elevated thinking to be having if it didn't exist. Now, maybe it's just an excuse to justify our existence.
Like the devil made me do it?
Yeah, or whatever we use to justify the fact that it's going on, and basically we're just microbes that happen to come together in some strange way, like there was no ultimate plan. Even if the plan was random and it was all evolution, the fact that it did what it did obviously had a map that was possible. It shows that there was an enormous amount of possibility for that random nature to evolve in a direction that produced, probably so far as we know, one of the greatest thinking capacities within our universe, as far as we know. Doesn't mean there aren't greater, doesn't mean that there isn't a greater sense of knowing. It simply means that as a species, we are considerably elevated in certain respects, which ironically we've turned against ourselves and actually have become a threat to all of the other species that don't have our seemingly great capacity. And nature itself, we become a threat to those things by doing things that aren't always that healthy. But nature seems to prevail anyhow. It just seems to fix. If we stop doing the thing that hurts it, it gets better very quickly. And when we try to fix the thing that hurts it, it gets worse. Doesn't mean it's irreparable. It seems to know exactly how to repair itself. And it doesn't seem to use the thinking we have to do that. It seems to know exactly what to do because it's always done exactly what it does.
Well, yeah, but it's a giant statement, and you know, it negates a lot of things that have been going on for a long, long time. Since, you know, you're considering that, you know, we're the only smart things around, you know.
Now, just within even our own concept, if it's only accurate within the confines of our planet, and we're elevated,
which it probably is not.
Okay. But if we're just talking about what we are aware of in terms of that, in terms of the immediacy of our experience, and see that we have actually turned our own awareness against our own experience to cause deficiencies in our own experience and deficiencies in our interactive potential with each other, that other aspect would obviously be drowned out because it wouldn't support the contention what we're doing is all that can be happening. we would naturally start to deny an elevation and awareness of things that might be very afraid to approach us because they see how reactive we are and how bent we are and how destructive we become in our own capacity to defend against each other with nuclear weapons in the name of peace. That would be a fairly flawed concept within the concept of actual rational reason. Doesn't make sense. It makes sense within the confines of the limited thinking we're doing, to give people a pause before they start using weapons like that, because they know they're going to get one back, just like the threat somebody would have in approaching somebody and picking a fight with them and wondering whether or not the guy is going to prevail. That tends to keep people moderated. In Texas, people carry guns. Very often, people with carrying guns on their hip do not get challenged by people as quickly as people who don't have those guns. You know, that's my experience. All a consequence of this sort of defective thinking that has created desperation and a sense of being on guard all the time and protective and defensive and needing to be in many cases, if in fact we're interested in living and continuing to live, rather than being subject to the violence and things that can happen so randomly and so quickly. And we're seeing it explode all over the place in our country. I think we're having a mental health epidemic, and it's not seen that way. It's not talked about openly. But it may just be a thought. It could be wrong. Yeah, it's a thought. It's not up to me. It's not up to you. It's up to us, ultimately. It's how we all think. And if there's any benefit of exploring this in a medium that can be listened to, it's to recognize the value of every single listener, and every potential listener is somebody who is fully intact and much more able than they may think they are. And to begin to consider that is to begin to actually step in directions that they might not consider possible at the same time, and do things not overtly as an attempt to cause a new fight or crusade, but gently, in the sense of beginning to notice that the nature of nature is not caustic and harmful at all, though it can go through its own, through earthquakes and tornadoes and all those things, very destructive to what we've built as humans. But they're just doing what nature does. They're not causing it out of vengeance or retribution or resentment or trying to get even. If we are at odds with ourselves, we're going to be at odds with all things. And even the self we're at odds with is just an illusion, like a lie of something we think we are, rather than who we actually are.
I'm trying to find something for you in this book to tell us.
The quote?
Oh, no, because you mentioned something on it about nuclear, and I know it's a very interesting book. A woman gave it to me when I was at a flea market, and I've never seen a book quite like it. It's called The War Atlas. And this guy made these charts of everything you could force without war, the Soviet garrison, foreign fields, at sea, all the nuclear, and he did it in the year 1983. So it's old, but he somewhere here he has 1983. He has all the nuclear explosions that have been set off, and there's thousands upon thousands of them, testing here and there and there and there and there and there and here and there. And I can't find them right now, but it's a very interesting book, very, very interesting book. But of course I'm looking for it and I can't find that page. But so what's the solution?
Well, getting back to the opening comments, my sense is if we were honest honesty would be something that aligns with what's happening. And at least whether we like it or not, it seems like liking something or not liking something has been the precursor of whether we're happy or not, right?
Beliefs.
But if we don't like what's happening, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just a thought we have about what's happening. And to think our thoughts are true and real would have us think all that we should have is what we like and never should have anything we don't like. When in fact, that's a pretty loaded problem, because the chances are there's going to be things that happen we don't like. And to live in the vein of thinking we should only get what we want is to miss the fact that we must want what we have to be doing what we're doing to cause the experience we're having. So again, it's a lie. It's dishonest to make believe that things that are happening shouldn't be happening when in fact they're happening.
It's a belief, it's like, I want this. And if I don't get it, I'm okay. So I need this. And if I don't get it, I'm unhappy.
The deeper belief is that the thoughts I have are true. And as a result, all I should ever get is what I think I wanted when I made a decision or a choice.
Yeah, it's like people say, well, you deserve this. You don't get what you deserve. You only get what you get.
Exactly.
And if you think you're going to get what you deserve, you're only going to be unhappy.
Well, because you're getting unhappiness, which is exactly what you deserve for thinking that.
No. Let's back up. If you think that you're going to get what you deserve, right?
Yes.
You don't get what you deserve. You only get what you get.
I got it.
Things happen. So if you sit around and say, I deserve to be this and that, all you're going to get is unhappy.
So what you deserve is the unhappiness.
I don't see how you did that.
Because you've created a circumstance that made you unhappy. So what you got was unhappiness. It was a direct relation to the idea you had that was wrong. Of course, you're going to be unhappy. Of course, you're going to be unhappy because whenever addictive thought is in play, it's always looking for what isn't happening to be the solution. So whatever is happening isn't it. There's always a conflict in it. It always ends up conflicted.
On the other hand, when people say, oh, well, you deserve that. You got it. So it was positive, right? But that's bullshit too.
I would say what's positive, if you look at the word posit, is what's happening. And what's negative is the idea that it shouldn't be happening, which is all fantasy. It's a negation of what's actually going on.
Right.
Do you know, John, and there are no negative numbers. They're only in math. They don't exist in the universe.
I can't do math.
Well, you can do 5 minus 7 would put you into negative territory. You can't have less apples than none, right? In the universe, that doesn't actually play out. But in mathematics, it plays out because we can conceptualize things and go off in theoretical directions to try to quantify things. And the point is that the idea that we can negate something, that there's a negative number attached to it, isn't true. We can take 7 apples and give away 7 apples and have none left, but that's an accurate assessment for the action we take. It's not negative. It's only negative if we thought we had to keep the apples and gave them away. Again, the conflict becomes obvious.
Because negate.
We think that we can negate what's happening by thinking positive thoughts.
Okay, that's great. I love that.
People come to this all the time. People come to me all the time.
You need to think positively, right?
Which is right. If you're trying to negate something and thinking positively about that, what's going to be the consequence? Probably unhappiness, because you're not going to negate the thing. That thing you think is going to be negated takes constant chronic focus, just like a lie maintaining it, because it isn't true. Unhappiness is the actual result of what you're asking for, but denying because you're pretending you can do what's impossible. So getting back to your unhappiness, the fact is that's an accurate assessment of what we're actually doing rather than what we think we should be doing when we're trying to think about things in ways that are impossible. If we think we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, while we're doing what we're doing, we're thinking the impossibility of not doing what we're doing while we're doing what we're doing is possible. That's not based in any reality I've ever experienced, because it
But it
seems
is,
like you said, you get what you get, which means
yeah,
we have what we have right now.
that's
And what we're doing
correct.
is what we're doing regardless of what we think about it. So if we don't like it, it's not the effect we're trying to correct by feeling better about it and liking it more. It's starting to see the essence of that thought must be wrong to have so much resistance to it. We know that we're resisting, but we simply haven't come to terms with the fact we are the creators of the proposition and or the thesis and now the antithesis. We're trying to do both simultaneously. It's impossible. So being with something, humility, for instance, is about being honest. What is honesty? Letting things be as they are. It isn't about thinking of them in some way that they aren't. And I would suggest every time I ever think of anything, I'm really thinking of what I'm thinking more than I'm thinking of the thing I'm thinking about. The thing I'm thinking about, if it has any existence at all, if it seems separate from me, whatever the components of that seeming existence, even if it isn't separate and I'm intimately connected to it in some way, in some underlying subatomic way that's unseen, doesn't mean it doesn't have some purpose of its own, doing what it's doing. I wouldn't be able to eat food if food didn't have the purpose of being food. It wouldn't be available. I wouldn't eat it.
Well, as long as you believe something will make you unhappy, you will keep experiencing the fear until it will make you unhappy. As Bruce DeMarco said in the 50s.
So think about the fear now as being an accurate assessment of being afraid of what we're creating because it's impossible. And finally coming to terms with it, being unhappy and realizing we've created the unhappiness is starting to be honest about it. It isn't because it had any basis other than our lying attempt to prove it was true that caused the unhappiness and the fear. The fear is an accurate assessment of what we're actually, when I have fear, I know what I'm thinking is primarily causing that fear. It's what I'm thinking about. Generally, I don't want what's happening. I don't like what's happening. I wish what was happening wasn't happening. I was hoping that it would stop happening. All that kind of stuff is bound up in thought, not reality. Reality is it's happening. Quicker I come to terms. What's that?
Reality is if you believe something's making you unhappy,
well,
you will believe it's making you unhappy.
But to call that reality is to make believe that you could actually replace reality that has no, it isn't in a realm where there's more or less of it. It's always a constant absolute source. If that is the case, then we would be able to replace it. We would feel fulfilled rather than disturbed, rather than contentious, rather than upset, rather than conflicted, rather than in emotional turmoil. Those things are consequences of knowing better that we're actually able to see the contrast and be aware of it. Not to read the body language is to miss the stop sign and wonder why you keep getting into accidents.
But you will seem to think that's how you feel, unhappy.
Yes.
If you believe something is making you unhappy, if you belief again, that something's making you unhappy, you're going to feel that belief.
So now let's look at the unhappiness as an accurate assessment of the thing we're doing causing it. What we don't read into it, while we might feel unhappy because of this whole complex thing that we've done and think it's the thing that we're blaming, we're again trying to avoid responsibility for developing it and creating it. It's all that it is. It's me trying to think.
I would say it's less than that.
Well, it can't be less than it is, and it wouldn't be more than it is. It would be what it is. So if I'm creating the opinion that I'm not doing what I'm doing, and these things are happening to me, I am again divesting myself of having any involvement at all in what I'm actually doing to even be entertaining the thought that what is happening shouldn't be happening. That isn't happening in the universe. It's happening in my brain.
So your brain thinks that the air conditioning vent is making me cold. And that's negative, right? So I'm thinking about the air conditioning vent, right?
I don't know that it's negative, because it's actually having an effect, and it's coming from there. And if I'm cold, I could wear a sweater, or I could turn the air conditioning off. That would be an
Right.
appropriate response of saying, I can now function within the realm of noticing what's happening and dealing with it directly, rather than thinking that that air conditioning event has a life of its own, that it's attacking me, that it's causing this problem because it hates me. And I am in a world filled with air conditioning vents that just always want to get their way. When it's the
I
way I'm
understand.
choosing that I'm insisting on seeing it from.
Right. So the difference between not liking the cold that's coming out of the air conditioning vent and hating the cold because it's making me feel a way I don't want to feel,
Yeah.
right, are very different.
Well, one of them is just conceding that you're designed to actually be aware of your environment and make choices about that environment that promote your survival. So not liking something doesn't mean the thing you don't like is the cause. It's what you're doing in relationship to it that is if you go out into the winter and it's 30 below zero and you've got no clothes on, you're obviously going to be confronted with something very, very difficult to face, right? It isn't
Unless
winter.
you're Wim Hof.
Well, I think even 30 below zero would be a stretch for him, but I don't know. He's stretched pretty far.
Pretty sure, yeah.
But if you're doing that, you made a choice. It's your choice that is having you confront that. If you, in fact, have no other choice and are limited to no other choice, and you are absolutely just dropped from an airplane into the middle of the Siberian wilderness with no clothes, you decided to get on the airplane. You decided to take all those possibilities were possible throughout the whole context of everything you did to end up in that place you are. It isn't to suggest you've got a ready solution to solve it, because I would say the solution is to freeze to death. And it would happen pretty quickly. And there's not a lot you can do. Most people in those conditions, many people, end up exhausting themselves and creating the perspiration that has them freeze to death because they work so hard to try to escape the situation because of the desperation. It's the perspiration on their body when they're wearing all the clothes and they start hiking desperately and running, trying to get away, trying to find some warmth. They create the perspiration, and the perspiration freezes right next to their body. So the thing they do to save them is killing them. Not to say that the situation isn't difficult and maybe impossible to overcome, given circumstances. If you're 30 miles away and in those kind of temperatures and not dressed for it, there's a good chance you're not going to make it to the nearest whatever.
Like the soccer team crashed on the top of the mountain.
Yeah, and some of those people survived.
They did.
Yeah.
And they walked out.
Despite all the odds.
They walked out.
Yeah. So if the choices we're making are so devoid of substance, the chances are we're going to be facing circumstances that are literally life-threatening of our actual body, when it is the self we think we are that we're struggling with and trying to put ourselves out of the misery of. We're trying desperately to escape this self we think we are with all these compulsive, reactive, and impulsive behaviors that are threatening our life. There's no compulsion that isn't a suicidal attempt or a suicidal tendency. None of them are healthy for us. Nobody overdoses on asparagus and broccoli or fresh food. Very hard to do that. Body has a natural limit. It says, thank you. I don't need any more. We don't tend to keep eating and eating and eating and eating and eat if we're eating fresh food. You just come to a limit and say, that's good. That's enough for me. Because the body says, thank you. I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to provide you the nutrient. It's doing what it's doing, which satisfies our appetite. When I'm giving,
I don't think you live in the real world, because you just got to understand that people
I'm
don't
not sure
do
the real
what
world
you're
you're
saying.
thinking about is real.
No, but it's actual. And what you're talking about is being sensitive, like I am, to my body and to what I eat my whole life, and that is very atypical.
So ignoring something doesn't mean it's not happening. Ignorance is denial. Ignorance is based,
what am I ignoring?
I don't know, but I'm talking in the general terms. If someone has a condition they don't think is happening, the chances are that condition is going to keep getting worse, and they're going to just think it's just the way they are. It's just who I am. It's just what my body does, while it's killing their body, because they're under that trance, under that coma, in that coma of thinking that desensitization, ignoring, is the goal. What is that? That's the trying to get over the feeling, trying to feel better, trying to constantly do things that make me feel better. What makes me feel better very often in those circumstances is French fries and potato chips. Not the best thing I can do for my body, but it feels better for a minute. Doesn't feel better the next day or that afternoon, but it feels better for a minute.
Carbohydrate.
So those tendencies are always available. And if we're thinking, our thinking we should get better at thinking that we're not feeling what we're feeling. We're going to create numbness, which actually has us almost go into a coma, which is the sleep state, completely thinking what's happening isn't happening. Well, all that's happening is what's in our brain thinking is all that's happening. Well, I really enjoy it and I can't give it up. That's the last thing I would ever do. Stop.
But it's, every time you should it, it's a judgment. You're making a judgment. You should do this. They should do that. This should happen. That's all judgments on your part.
Yes. Yes. And there's nothing wrong with judgment. It's that when you think what is happening shouldn't be happening, that is a problem. That is a problem because it's happening.
Shouldn't, should. It's the same shit.
It's only shit, though, if you're thinking of it as reality, and you're thinking of it as the only thing you can do, and you're thinking of it as something that's saving the life of a self born of thought, not reality. It's just what we're thinking.
But you just did it twice, and
I used it as an example to show how the thinking can be turned into exactly what I started with today. If I don't think I should be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing, that is a conflict of thought, nothing else.
But when you say that these people, these giant lands of the giants, remember that show? These people should eat natural food and be content at the third pair and then stop. That's ridiculous.
I haven't said that. I have said that the body.
Well, I'm using the third pair analogy. You're absolutely right. You didn't say that.
But I didn't say they should be doing this. I'm just simply suggesting that when a body eats something, just like when a thought has no substance, we're going to beg for more thought. That's what creates mentally obsessive thinking. There's no nourishment in it. There's nothing fulfilling in it. There's nothing satisfying in it. So what do I need? More and 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 more. Same with food, same with drugs, same with alcohol, same with gambling, same with sex, same with any of the things I can turn to try to distract myself from what I'm actually doing and think the distraction is actually attractive. When all it's doing is lending to the source in thought activities to give me the impression it's the only thing I can do because it's the only thing I keep doing. That's insanity.
So what would we do?
What would we do?
Yes. Since you mentioned eating, sex, alcohol, what else? Drugs. So what would we do?
Well, we would probably be more moderate rather than think more is when enough is never enough, you've clearly got a problem. And that would
more is better.
Well, more might be better in certain.
No. I didn't mean it was better. It's really, I'm being honest. It's really what I used to say all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I suspect in certain respects, that's probably true. I mean, working out and breathing deeply. And if you're doing it half the time during the day when you could be sitting up straight and breathing better during the day, there's probably some huge benefits that would come from that. So if you're doing less of something that's healthy, doing more might be a good choice. I don't know. I don't.
Yeah, no, it's a very alcoholic idea.
Yeah. But it's born in this addiction and thought.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than isolate the focus on people out there doing things that seem to be obscene and absurd. I do those same things on a daily basis to the degree that I maintain thoughts that aren't true, that I try to overcome the conflicts that are created, that I try to feel better about them, that I try to push down or hide the effects they're having on me. I do that every day to some degree. And if that's the case, and I would consider myself sober for 35 years, having some degree of awareness, it became pretty clear to me that the possibility is always possible. And that to think it isn't possible is to make believe once again that what's happening isn't always happening. What's possible isn't always possible. It's always possible for us to go wrong, choose wrong. It's always possible when we do that to think it's right. We don't tend to make decisions because we think it's wrong. But we tend to get defensive when we make wrong decisions and we think they're right because we're maintaining ideas. We're thinking that exerts self-control and that's self-confidence and all these other words. But it's actually a decaying process, has a decaying effect on our system and our body. So to your question earlier, what's the solution? Beginning to look at things accurately and beginning to realize that all possibility is always possible. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't say don't ever think about drinking anymore. It doesn't say don't go near it. It doesn't say you can't ever do it. It says the problem is removed because we've thought about it honestly. He said, I just don't seem to have the ability to drink in any moderate form. Whenever I start, it seems to go places I don't expect, in amounts I never plan on. And that's consistent enough for me to finally say, you know what, something's wrong with my body in relation to that. I don't deal well with refined carbs. And that's what liquor is. All liquor are basically refined carbs. I don't deal well with bread. Even great bread, I don't deal well with it. I tend to eat more of it. I tend to feel like I'm hungover. My eyes are puffy in the morning. I often get watery eyes. I get my throat swells up a little bit. But
I know you like bread.
The symptoms aren't quite bad enough for me to want to stop. So I keep engaging very often with those things, thinking somehow it'll get better. Slightly compared to what I used to do. But to say that I no longer do it would be another way of trying to avoid the fact that I do. And I do it daily to some degree. And that if my awareness is still engaging in those things, certainly other people are doing it or aren't even thinking about it. Why wouldn't they? Because it's a possibility. My sensation or my sense of it is that all of the effects that we're struggling with, whether it be weight gain, or anxiety or stress or disorders of all kinds of varieties that keep getting new and new names attached to them for slight variations of this same sort of dissection of our own experience, are all accurate, natural consequences for unnatural thinking, which are telling us you can go there, a loving authority. If love is the essence of this infinite source, the freedom to do whatever we want, we're always free to do. And it's not saying stop. It's not saying you can't do it. It's saying, hey, you got all the choices. You have a built-in roadmap in your own experience of what's right and wrong. And if you don't want to listen to it, that's your choice. And what you're going to face are consequences that are accurately assessing your thinking in relation to what's actually going on. And if the consequences seem like they're happening to me and I'm not noticing that I'm actually creating them, I'm missing the value of those consequences teaching me what I'm actually thinking that's wrong, and begin to concede that so that I can surrender and expose to that natural awareness my thinking, and allow it to begin choosing from the bounty of that awareness rather than the recirculation of thoughts, thinking about thoughts, that basically become a drowning pool of stagnation, which even water turns to poison if it isn't refreshed. So toxic thoughts would be a byproduct of that kind of thinking.
I think we have to be really careful.
I don't.
Analogizing, no. It's your show. You don't have to be careful. I think we have to be really careful analogizing certain things to thought, like eating.
Well, I would think that if I didn't realize that thought is a precursor of every voluntary action we take, and eating would be one of those nobody's ever forced food down my throat. It's always just like a drink. It always came with that handy little maneuver of my hand picking something up and aiming it toward my mouth. It wasn't an accident. I might have been in a whiteout or a blackout, but it wasn't an accident. It was a calculated endeavor. And
right.
I don't.
When you were young, you were fed.
What's that?
When you were young, you were fed.
And yet it still involved my own sucking to be able to get that breast milk into my body. There was an accident.
You needed an orifice. That's correct.
Yeah. So even then, though, John, there was a knowingness to do what I needed to do to be fed when I wasn't really cognitive enough to be thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there was a backdrop of knowingness that was pretty clear. So there's nature compared to thinking. I'm not talking about things that happen in our body that we don't think about, because there's an enormous amount of stuff going on in the brain communicating with the rest of the body that we don't think about at all, and we don't worry about it until it hurts. And
there's a lot of stuff missing.
What's that?
There's a lot of stuff missing that we used to be able to do and we can't do any longer.
Well, I would say that's a degenerative generations. Numbing ourselves have impacted our DNA to even function under the weight of insanity. Our systems are not designed to function well and healthy under anxiety. It sort of throws it into chaos, because what do you do with something it's like me trying to convince somebody I'm talking to who's insane that my rationale should make sense to them. Who's the insane party then but me? Trying to engage with insanity. It's the same thing I'm doing in my own thinking, imagining my body should feel no consequence from this. And it does degenerate. It has degenerated. We have new allergies all the time as a result of it. We have new diagnosis for mental disorders and anxiety disorders and metabolic disorders and all that kind of stuff as a result of this defective stress that we have imposed. And we think it's normal. You can't normalize something that's abnormal and not have a conflict. Normal is normal, and normal would be healthy and healing, not disease.
What I was getting at was that, when I was a little boy, we had big, heavy telephones, right? And you had a clicker on the side, and then you would hold up this 2.5 pound receiver into your ear, and then you would talk on that thing. There was no dial on the phone. It would click, 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 click. And then Mabel would ask you, what do you want? And then you say, can you connect me to PE57342? But there might be 6 other people talking on the line, and you would have to tell them that this was more important than the conversations that they were having. They would have to hang up so that you could use the line, that party line. But there was no dial on the phone. So when I was a little boy, my mother used to tell me that I used to pick up the phone, and then she would make sure no one was there, and then give it back to me. And then I would talk to my grandfather, and he was dead, and I'd never met him. And then she would say, who are you talking to? I'm talking to Grandpa. And then she said, but he's dead. You're not talking to Grandpa. But then Grandpa told me things that had happened on the phone. He told me things that had happened to my father that I had no idea about. And those kinds of connections, as we get older, we lose.
No.
Because we're unaware of.
We're aware of them. We're heartbroken. We're grieving. We're in mourning. We're sad. We're in doubt. We feel depleted. We feel we need to do something desperately to make up for a life that feels worthless. Those things are not accidental. They're actually witnessing that, John. And your own awareness of that, if you could have that clarity to witness your grandfather's experience of him, is to witness that you're not talking about something that's tangible within a physical form, and yet it's tangible within your physical form as something that doesn't seem to add up or make sense. He wasn't technically on the phone, and yet you had an intuitive, you were there to talk to him, so what you did was speak with him, and what you heard was things he had to say. He didn't say
Yes.
those in words, but he said it in a knowing awareness of your awareness that you were able to recognize. And whether you give him credit for it or just begin to notice that that is a telepathic awareness. We are all intimately aware of everything going on in ways so far beyond what we think that the depreciated value of our experience has become normalized. It isn't normal.
Right.
It's completely abnormal.
I'm in agreement with you. And I will tell you like more recent idea, right? So I'm a spear fisherman,
Yes.
right? So I for like since he's a little boy, I've been diving with my son, my second son, Enzo, and underwater, he can be 100 feet away in crystal clear water, right? And I can say, in my mind, I can say, Enzo, and he will immediately, from whatever he's doing, and he's hunting, he's on, so to speak, right? He is really hunting, right? And he will look up at me and I will give him an okay sign. And I can do that all day long underwater. And I can't do that in the air at all with him.
Well, let's say you can, but the familiarization of being above air, in air, when you're not in the intensity of that experience that is driving your experience a little differently than the sort of seeming normal familiarity that we all get so used to. We're sort of numb to all the anxiety and stress that's going on and think
distractions.
Yeah, exactly.
And underwater, you have no distractions except what you're doing. So when I
you go,
repeatedly
give the listeners a little bit of an idea. You're going down 60 feet with no tanks.
Yeah. But I'm not talking about, I can do that at the surface because our heads are in the water, our snorkels are out, right? So gotcha. The water could be, 150 feet visibility. So I let him get pretty far away from me and we're floating with current. We're not swimming. And I might see something that he doesn't see. And I can look over at him and say, Enzo. And in my head, and he will absolutely turn and look right at me. And then I'll give him an okay, or I'll point and say, look at this coming at you. And then he'll dive and I'll dive. And yes, we hunt at about 50, 60 feet.
Yeah.
But that telepathy is absolutely real. And if you haven't experienced something like that, you can't understand how real it is.
Well, I would suggest, and this may sound pompous, grandiose, and arrogant. We're expressing it all the time. We just are ignoring it because we're trying so desperately to prove what we're thinking is right. We're trying to ignore the reality of our own awareness. So when we hear those thoughts, we dismiss them. We pretend they're not there. We think of them as haunting, as fear-filled, as voodoo, as black whatever we can turn them into, to basically turn them into the same cause that we're actually creating, because the fear base of this whole idea of who I am is what I think is only based in fear. Why? Because I know better. If I didn't know better, I wouldn't have that fear. I would think I'm doing the only thing possible, and I would be doing the only thing possible, and I would be fulfilled with the complete lunacy of it.
The sharing of an experiential like that is it has its own fear attached to it, because people dismiss
Yes.
because people vehemently dismiss what I'm saying as an impossibility. It's kind of like being an experiencer, right?
Yes.
You're not just a believer, you're an experiencer. And when you explain what you've seen, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this on Sunday. Then that gets laughed at, or it gets I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but we had this absolute discussion. And so there's a fear of being honest with others.
Well, It's the same fear that we maintain by thinking who we are is what we think and feel that our life is threatened by anyone who doesn't think like we think.
Yeah, that's it right there. Thank you.
When I started this discussion, John,
Mm-hmm.
I used to get nauseous.
Yeah, you told me this is the conversation that I analogize to.
So I had done this with one other person for a long time. And so it was a bit of an ivory tower. But when I started realizing that the real conversation is not being held broadly, I began to open up to 6 people, 8 people, 10 people, and people got very, very upset. And it really affected me. And I realized how much of an investment I had in thinking that they needed to think like I did, and how afraid I was of people based on what they thought, not what they did. Most of those people never harmed me in any way, but what they thought was so threatening to me because my thought of who I was based in thought. And the whole fear basis of that self-centered idea is thinking that thinking about itself all of a sudden becomes who I am.
Yes.
That's insanity.
Yes, that's what this is about.
So exactly. And one of the things, to your earlier point about witnessing what people are doing, the reactiveness I began to say and think and see that I was having, I began to realize is the reactiveness that I trigger in others, which is their awareness that something's wrong, that they're trying to fight. They're trying to fight for the life of the thing they think is wrong, thinking it's the life they have and the life they need to maintain, because it seems to threaten who they are, because they've made believe what their thoughts are is real and true rather than simply imagined ideas, concepts. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it was a much different experience for me because it slowly dissipated. And I realized that I was actually being with them about what they did and what I did in common, rather than thinking of it as something they were doing that I could flash my finger at and say, stop doing that. That's what's wrong with you. That's what's wrong with you, not what, wait a minute, I do the same exact thing. I have the potential to do that same thing. And to any degree I maintain a thought that isn't true, I am going to do that exact same thing. And there is a beautiful sense that the natural order always reveals itself. When I'm inaccurate, I get inaccurate responses that I think are reality. But if I listen to the words, they're telling me something's wrong in what I'm doing, because all of a sudden I feel wrong. I feel bad. I feel less than. I feel competing. I feel I need more. Something's triggered that if I look at it accurately, rather than as something to guide me to the next stupid idea or the next desperate or fearful idea, I start saying, oh, I've been accurately assessing this the whole time, but I've been taking what comes. I've been turning it backward again, because I've been stuck in the mode of thinking my life actually does depend on maintaining this thought. So I turn the feelings backward and think of them as something to run from, rather than begin to say, thank you.
So how do we increase our awareness?
Well, I would suspect doing this between us is doing that. And if my sense is, if I sit and do this alone, like I meditate all the time, it certainly offers me a great deal of awareness, but it seems to be distinct from everyone else. And my experience is that if we're all doing this, and if I truly come to terms with reality being reality for everyone at all times, everywhere, and everything at all times, everywhere, if that's true, which I would say it would be hard to argue with, that reality isn't real and that it's part-time, because it wouldn't be real at all if it were anything other than absolute in real terms, not these terms that we come up with conclusions about what we think is real and what we think is true that are limited to the thinking we're doing. And because they serve the thoughts we're having, which is self-serving thought, we're just serving a thought we think we are, rather than actually the reality of our existence. If I'm absolutely part of something absolute and begin to see that as everyone's nature, I speak to you from a very different point of view than I would if I thought I had something to tell you that you should listen to do better about being worse, to feel better, to overcome. All those kind of training lessons that I used to give people were all helping them to avoid what they were actually doing by feeling better about what they were doing, telling them it would be okay, telling them everything will be fine, telling them just to do this, that, and the other thing, and it'll all work out. When in fact, I wasn't using the immediacy of the moment to say, you're only creating this now. The imposition of those thoughts are literally the imposition of a self you think you are. And that imposition, the longer you maintain it, will be depressing naturally. And the depression is going to give you an idea, if you look at it honestly, that you're carrying something that's too heavy to bear. It's not part of your design. Our design thought is a very, very light, like light. It has no real weight to it. It may have some weight because it's happening, but it would be so infinitesimally small is to never create the kind of depression we create by constantly maintaining those thoughts and imposing that stress on our body that begins to build up and give us an experience of something that's seriously wrong because we get brittle. Our muscles they tense up. The tension that would be typical in a muscle that's developed ends up being a decayed state of a muscle that's no longer getting oxygen and blood and starts to actually be conducive to disease in our physical body. Doesn't have to happen immediately to be happening. And my suspicion is it's always happening immediately. And it's the maintenance of it over time that causes the debilitating effects that are really screaming for our attention. But I'm continuing addictively to make believe the best thing I can do is deny it because it's worked so far and it hasn't killed me. Well, in fact, I'm just committing a very slow form of suicide.
Yeah, I resemble that remark.
Me too. And it's not me, it's just the thing I do. And seeing thinking as something I do really makes the transition from seeing it's a choice. It's something I choose to do. I can use it or misuse it. And if I misuse it and mistake my identity for it, I'm going to have a cavalcade of experiences that are going to give me evidence of what I'm doing that's wrong, because I am not going to feel peaceful. I'm not going to feel at ease. I am not going to feel comfortable. I'm not going to feel assured and certain. I'm going to feel ill at ease, diseased. I'm going to feel uncertain. I'm going to feel doubt. I'm going to constantly be trying to mend fences and trying to feel better. Why am I always trying to feel better if I'm not aware of something that's worse? The expansiveness starts to click, and all of a sudden the awareness of it all starts to become intuitive because it becomes obvious that we've just been acting oblivious rather than actually confronting what's happening honestly. And it starts in the most immediate aspect of our awareness, where we are doing what we're doing now.
Let's go.
So to your question earlier of what's the solution is that there is no problem. And the resolution, which we tend to do on January 1st, we make all these resolutions clearly admitting these are not things we've ever been interested in doing, and all of a sudden think because a certain date occurs, we're going to start doing them. And that they generally last till about the third week. If I remember from Gold's Gym, there was a whole influx of people that we weren't used to seeing, and they're gone by January 21st, roughly. The point is, this isn't about resolution. This is about disillusion. It is about literally eliminating the problem from the start. So there's nothing to stop. If we start looking and seeing freely that we're choosing to do this, it will make no sense to continue doing it. And if it does make sense for a moment, you will quickly recognize by the conflict created what you've done so that you can say, oh, I went down this path again. I'm here now. Do I need to continue? No. The freedom is always there not to do. Choice always allows not to be chosen. So the disillusion is literally starting to see that the vaporous nature of this misty, foggy notion has literally been considered to be solid, a real block, when in fact it was just a hallucination. It was a trance of ideas trying to feed ideas, new ideas about what was truth and reality, and struggling, fixated on something that's constantly being broken. It's like fixing a flat tire in a car by constantly putting air in it, never fixing the flat tire. So resolution would be constantly adding air, which in our case would be the inflation of this idea we have of ourselves, constantly having to do things to feel better and bigger about who we are, constantly having to be more, think more, do more, have more, get more, all that kind of stuff, versus fixing the flat where there's no leak and being able to utilize it, just run on it. Realize it's always possible for me to do this. It's not something that goes away, because all possibility is possible within the realm of possibility. But the other aspect of it is that what is impossible is never possible in the realm of possibility. And one thing that isn't possible is to not exist while we exist. And addiction is trying to act as though addiction and ego and all this stuff mentally is trying to pretend we aren't doing what we're doing while we're doing what we're doing.
Yes. So, but without this discourse, we could not even understand that it's all about now.
Well, we do, though, because we're always experiencing everything from the present. We're just thinking we're not. We're just thinking about it as something in the past. The past is always only considered in the present. The future is only ever considered in the present.
I understand. But without us having this discourse,
yes,
these topics would never come up.
Well, they're coming up, though. I mean, people have been investigating and looking and thrashing, and I suspect the difference here, and I give Bill Wilson great credit for what he put together. He cobbled together a program based on previous successes and failures. He didn't do it alone. He did it as a descendant of other thoughts and thinkers and people who were looking and saying, what is it that we're doing that's wrong? People who wanted to be honest and responsible and look at things accurately. And through history, that's always been a paradigm shift of consciousness and awareness where people go, oh, of course. They don't even think about it anymore because they recognize something. That's that aha moment. It's not that they didn't know, they just didn't think they knew. So for our human experience, introducing this to thought by communicating and having a discourse, which is really not a course, but it's a communion of sorts, really communing over ideas of commonality and unity and wholeness and seamlessness rather than seemingness. How things seem and look is not how things are. That's just how they appear. How things are is how they are. Starting to see that as the common bond rather than the things we think we see in our own imagination, our own illusory ability to imagine those things. Very different experience because it's profound to see somebody all of a sudden start to stare out into space a little bit and contemplate the awareness of the expansiveness rather than constantly defend the limitations of their exclusiveness, of their inclusiveness, where they're trying only to use thought as the sole source of their existence.
So if you were to whittle, if you could whittle.
For anybody who doesn't know whittling, it's carving out of wood.
Yeah, if you were to whittle.
Used to be the old, that was social media years ago.
Hang on. If you were to whittle this conversation down to a more succinct explanation of what we're doing, what would that be?
Sanity versus insanity.
What we're doing, not what are we doing?
You and I?
Yes.
Being.
Yeah, I understand that. But please explain yourself. You just went on a fucking, 12-page, journey, right, of the tongue. And now I want you to break it down a little.
Okay.
What are we doing?
I would say if we're aware of what's happening, and we're always aware of it, all we've been doing is thinking we aren't. It's starting to see that thinking is just thinking. It isn't who we are. It's something we do. It's a major function of our capacity to function. It is what determines for us what we do with the information we're getting from all of our sensations. It is the potential of us to realize our capacity as human beings rather than our incapacity, to start to notice the productive capacity we have to give and be so abundant that nobody is in need or lacking. Nobody would want even to have more because it would be a greater burden. It would just be shared equally and everyone would have the abundance and the nature that's natural that we already have. We're already sharing it. It's already the nature of nature as far as I can tell. We're just not acting that way.
What's going on? What
Everything.
Is John and Jack doing?
Contemplating in a conversation an awareness that is often considered not available because it's not spoken to, or considered not present because it isn't spoken to or spoken of. And when it is, it's thought of in ways that are mystical and superstitious and all that kind of stuff and beyond us and out there somewhere in heaven, but not here. when in fact, if that infinite source is infinite, it can't be separate from where we are ultimately in our essence. It may seem like it, and there may be limitations that we come up against in our human form. That doesn't make anything limited. It just means the ability we have expressed in that knowing is expressed in limited ways.
I think that sentence before the sixth after is really, that's really good. I think we need to write that down. That's a very, very, very good sentence.
Which one was
on
that?
Your synopsis sentence.
Oh.
Your synopsis sentence, which is about 8 sentences ago now, needs to be written down.
Well, so as a parting thought, because I know your time is short, you want to finish something?
Yeah, I was just gonna go ahead.
Please finish. I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is that I really like your definition of what we're doing, what the two of us are doing right now, because it's something that's not looked at, even though, you know, it is what it is, and it's happening, and then, but still the talking about it, the discourse, you know, and the questioning and the back and forthisms, you know, I think are very, very relevant. And I learned from it. So hopefully anyone listening, you know, will get a handle on it. And I do have to go. But before I say color me gone, just understand that I really appreciate your take on these things.
Well, I appreciate your appreciation, and I suspect that that's much greater than the depreciated state we create by doing otherwise and thinking otherwise. So that's my goal, is to talk about this openly, and for the audience and you, John, is to think of this as something that's capable of being done 24 hours a day in your thinking, and as a result, 24 hours a day in your interactions with people, because those same people that you may or may not think have this same awareness absolutely have it if they have it. And if you strike that bell or ring that bell, it will be obvious to them something that they maybe have also been oblivious to and have also known, like the woman at the meal last night said, yeah, I remember that when I was 2. You know, there's the awareness has occurred at different points in our life, but we have smothered it in the ideas that we have. So we're ending a second episode. We're going to start a third. And I think this is a great end for the beginning of that, to begin to explore it, because the idea of doing 3 of these originally was to give the audience an awareness of how capable and possible it is in a very short order to go from seemingly self-centered ideas and all that to begin to ponder these ideas and start to recognize the unity that exists, and then begin in the third episode, potentially, and my hope and prayer is that we really use that basis now to start exploring what we can do relative to all the ideas we've been thinking about, what can't be done and what's impossible and so forth. Even if they're considered in thought, if we consider them in thought as something possible, we will start acting in ways that we thought were impossible before that. And that, to me, is the transition and the confirmation of what we're doing, because anybody can do this anywhere, because they're already where they are as they are now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was your idea to limit this to 3.
What's that?
It was your idea to limit this to 3.
Well, I thought of it as 3 dimensions because it's what we tend to think we live in. So it gave the potential of having a before, middle, and end, which is effectively what a story is and a life is. All lives have a beginning at birth in terms of life forms, and they have a middle, which is everything in between. And then they fade into back to the essence of whatever they were made of to begin with. That essence in our body never goes anywhere. It's just a reformation.
I write big sentences, so, you know, I might think differently than you on that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And I expect we all have the potential to do that. And it doesn't undermine the absolute nature of our nature at the same time. It still maintains what's simple about something absolute is that it does not change. It is always present. It is always as it is. It is never something else. It's only what we think of it that gives us those impressions. And if that's the
Kinda-
case, what's that?
Kind of, it sounds kind of like the outer limits, remember?
Well, this would be outside the limits of the thinking for sure. And that's what those, I mean, think
All
of all the
right.
stuff through history that we have imagined possible well before it even happened.
Trust me, you don't want to get into that conversation with me right now.
Well, the quote that you gave me, I'm going to read this to the audience as we end here, from Plato, now 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. Sooner or later, most people reach the disturbing realization that even what they cannot believe may be true.
Yes, sir.
And it might be worth considering that it's been true the whole time we didn't believe it or believed in thoughts that weren't true. Love you. Thank you very
Take care.
much. Thank you for your engagement in this. I really appreciate it greatly. And to me, we are at a time in history when people are starting to wonder what's going on. And my suspicion is the answer has been perfectly clear the whole time, and we simply haven't been talking about it. So we continue. Love you.
Bye.